Thanks to the 3DS Virtual Console, I was able to become a late adopter to the Mega Man series. Back in 2013, I played through the first 6 NES games for the first time, and during the seemingly inconspicuous period where I first got into the games, we also had Mega Man announced for Smash Bros., a Kickstarter for a spiritual successor that I'll play one day once it's released for 3DS and Vita, and also some YouTuber I had never heard of started a Mega Man review marathon that I just had to watch. It's like the universe itself is trying to turn me into an annoying Mega Man fan, and that's what I became. I played the Game Boy games. I played 7, 8, 9, 10, Rockman and Forte, and obviously Mega Man for Game Gear. It'd take a few more years before I'd make the leap into X, Zero, or Soccer. So these classic games were all I had, and they were very sentimental to me, because this is all I saw Mega Man as for years. But I didn't know that another classic game was missing. Sure, I knew of Mega Man Powered Up, but it was just the same game with a new coat of paint, right? And who would seriously still play a PSP? That's an irrelevant handheld that no one would ever care about. Whoops. Anyway, I was ignorant about a lot of things for a few years, and then I finally played Powered Up on what is obviously one of the best gaming systems ever produced. But it's worth noting this wasn't the first Mega Man remake for PSP. This is actually the second, thanks to Maverick Hunter, which remade the first Mega Man X game. This isn't particularly relevant to what Powered Up is, but it does show Capcom's mindset during this era. They had planned to remake all of Mega Man X and the Mega Man Classic games for this portable PlayStation, and they wanted these to be the definitive releases with extra content, modern graphics, and what would have been a consistent tone if this idea went far. However, as is often the case with PSP games, this didn't make a big enough sales splash globally to justify this project, and it all crumbled apart 2 games in. And as is even more often the case, these PSP games haven't been re-released, and have kind of fallen off the radar to anyone who isn't a hardcore fan. And despite their improvements, they have been replaced again with the decades-old original games that continuously get re-released on every modern system. For Maverick Hunter, it's especially a shame since quite a few Mega Man X games could have used a do-over, and the one we did get was perhaps the one that needed it the least. But at least with Mega Man Classic, the one game that we got remade to us is without a doubt the one that benefited from it the most. To me, the Mega Man Classic franchise is made up of almost too many games that certainly have peaks and valleys, but for the most part they kind of hit the same mold. I have my preferences, but for the most part I can see why almost any game in the series is anyone's favourite, and their least favourite, with a couple of exceptions. The main reason I use that qualifier is because Mega Man 1 is really rough. Also throw 8 in there, and bass. The games aren't all close to equal or anything, but there is a standard most games hit, and Mega Man 1 obviously fell the shortest of this for the console releases. But it was still a pioneer for such an early game of its generation. Some of the ideas that it really brought to the mainstream were allowing the player to choose the order they completed most of the stages in, or giving the player a large arsenal of weapons, some of which are actually good sometimes. It was a really good basis, which is why its glut of sequels built upon this further and refined everything. Mistakes like the spike glitch that kills you even when you should have invincibility frames, or an item that seems optional but actually isn't, so you need to backtrack to an earlier level in case you missed it, and not being able to easily heal were all things that were corrected in its sequels, which, while great for all those titles, did leave the first game feeling like more of a relic, even if almost every sequel looked exactly the same to a layperson. Most of these improvements and other series tropes were thankfully added to Mega Man 1 when it was remade for PSP with Powered Up. Perhaps the most jarring change is the chibi art style that is so in your face with its cuteness, and it's not to everyone's tastes. I initially didn't care for it because I didn't think the chibi look translated super well to 3D, but it did grow on me, and it'll grow on you more if you keep playing this game as much as I did, or at the very least you'll become numb to it. Some of the other characters like Cutman lend themselves so well to it and I love it. Look at my angry-eyed little guy here. Iceman too. Really, they all look great once you get used to it. even though Bomb Man took a lot of getting used to. Maybe it's just because the cartoon poisoned my brain and made me envision him as a large, bulky guy with a beak or something. What I find more interesting is how they've reinvented the earlier backgrounds. This isn't just a one-to-one recreation of the aesthetics. Iceman doesn't have palm trees in the background, Bomb Man doesn't have those sphere-looking things, because back in the 90s we already had a faithful Mega Man 1 remake, and while that's beautiful, I'm glad they didn't do the same thing for a third time. It leads to nice touches as well, like Elec Man stage actually looks kind of electrical, or Cut Man stage is based around logging instead of weird green bricks. And even if you're not looking at the details, everything is much more distinct with better color choices. Bomb Man has an intimidating black, Elec Man has green circuits, and Wily Stage 1 is embracing pink to its fullest. And this new identity extends to the 2 new Robot Master stages here. Yeah, we have a total of 8 to defeat, which brings this game in line with the rest of the series. Time Man has a charmingly clockwork stage that kind of makes up for its boring design, and Oil Man stage is beautifully desaturated with wonderful backgrounds and cute cactus enemies. But it isn't enough to make up for the misstep that its design is. It's obviously rooted in racist imagery, and if it wasn't obvious enough, the Japanese version goes even further into it. This is such a blemish on what would otherwise be a definitive package, and it's something you can't really ignore, which is unfortunate due to how many times this robot will be on screen across a complete playthrough. And the word complete is important, because you can beat this game and see its credits pretty quickly. This is Mega Man 1 at the end of the day. But the devs went above and beyond to stretch out the total playtime, for better and worse. While this is an official retail game, it almost feels like a fan game. It's not to disparage it, even if it does sound very insulting, but we get a lot of the kinds of details fan games or mods would do. The most obvious of these is something that those of you that actually look at the screen would have already seen. But for those of you only half paying attention to this video, we have a lot of playable characters, and the polish of these is so inconsistent that it kind of doesn't feel like a commercial release. But even if it wasn't executed perfectly, and at times it frustrated me, the ambition won me over. Mega Man comes equipped with his restrictive movement like Mega Man 1 and 2, but upon beating the game across all 3 difficulties we're also granted a sliding Mega Man. A sliding Mega Man who can do charge shots, and a weaponless Mega Man who can only do kicks, which still isn't the hardest thing the game has despite it being a clear hard mode. Because we also have Cut Man, Bomb Man, Guts Man, Elec Man, Fire Man, Ice Man, Time Man, Oil Man, Proto Man, and even Roll, who is equipped with a lot of different cosmetic outfits. They all have a lot of different playstyles, yet they still go through the same levels that were largely designed around what Mega Man can do. Balancing this would be nearly impossible, and not surprisingly they kind of failed, with Oil Man being the most egregious of these. It's a shame because his moveset would be really fun in another game. He slides on an oil board and this floats above water too. Whenever I get to just slide, it's some of the most fun the game has. It's very quick and reaction based. But this barely happens because the levels obviously weren't built this way, and his weapon is not only incredibly weak, it can't be fired again if a single oil spill is on screen, meaning if you miss an attack you just have to wait a while before you can attempt a second attack. Thankfully the other Robot Masters aren't frustrating, and they all have really fun gimmicks, that at best completely change how levels or bosses are approached, but usually just add a small wrinkle to the tried and true stages, but the changes are welcome nonetheless. Like Cut Man, he's pretty basic but he can do a wall jump. Perhaps the most successful of these new characters in terms of feeling nothing like before without being infuriating is Guts Man. No wonder he's Wily's favourite. He has no projectiles, and similar to the power that Mega Man gets for defeating him, he can just throw certain blocks. What makes this work, however, is he can create blocks out of nothing, though he does still need space in front of him, and this can't be done while moving. These can then be thrown at enemies, but it is a slow and deliberate chain of actions, where improper timing or spacing can be your demise. Blocks can still be placed above spikes or other platforming challenges to cheese them, and this extends to bosses, which in the case of some of them makes these fights hilarious. Depending on your perspective, the following feature is either a really cool attention to detail, or the most frustrating thing imaginable. All the Robot Masters only have one attack, and it fits the same kind of boss weakness of before. You can be doing next to no damage in some fights while the bosses can defeat you almost instantly. But hey, it also means that you get to do that back to another Robot Master later on. This is why we don't ever speak of the Oil Man, Flame Man fight in this household. Even on what this game calls easy mode, this would still be one of the hardest fights in the entire series. The easier difficulty does streamline some things, like reduce the number of pits, have enemies do less attacks, and have more limited movement for some as well. It also makes the boss fights only do regular attacks. Cause new to this game in both normal and hard mode, the Robot Master fights have a more complicated secondary attack, which is unleashed later in the battle. They're all quite fun, and they make these fights feel fresh, except for the times where it just slows down everything, since the bosses are invincible for a short time, which is often a non-issue, but it turns the Bomb Man fight into a tedious encounter where we just have to patiently wait for him before we can attack again. But other than that, it's a fine inclusion that ratchets up the intensity and variety. For if the players hate all these, and all the other bells and whistles that I haven't even mentioned yet, there is an old style mode included here as well. Here, the levels and bosses are recreated much more faithfully. This is really only here for the kinds of people who want the old 8-bit original, mostly unchanged, but also want completely different visuals, and while it's odd, it's a nice inclusion. It really does highlight how different the main game actually is. That plays like what you probably remember Mega Man 1 being like, whereas the old style is much more like it, complete with the levels that basically end after a minute. The main game adds a lot to stretch out and better pace the levels without betraying how they felt, though I can do without the reliance of footholders as platforming challenges. Even the Legacy collection admits they're annoying. But even with that, the overall level quality is so much better here. Elec Man stage doesn't start with that annoying first room, and Guts Man stage isn't just one hard section at the very beginning followed by a bunch of nothing. Though I will still give the old style credit for having some of the quality of life improvements. In it, and also new style, we can switch what weapon we have with the shoulder buttons. And when we're in old style, it actually puts the UI like health and ammo on the border of the screen, so much more screen real estate's available. If I ever want to play the old level designs, this is basically the go-to way to do it, even though Mega Man's pellets don't go through walls anymore, so this isn't one-to-one even in the old style unfortunately. Another example of it would be the Yellow Devil fight, which is in the mold of new style, which is also nothing like before. Old style is still nice to see just for the magnet beam in full. It no longer flickers all the time. It looks really nice here actually. And the magnet beam was a personal favourite way to bypass all the sections that require skill, even if Rush Jet is actually way cuter. Surprisingly, this item isn't here in new style, and while I can kind of see why since it was annoying to collect, but I loved using it, and given all the new sections here where we have to jump onto annoying moving platforms, which also constantly shoot you when in hard mode, I would have loved an option to cheese all this. Oh well, small complaint here, since Wily 1 isn't the same mess it once was. That level got the most drastic change, including the Yellow Devil boss now being almost too easy to actually fight, though it is still a very tedious fight since it goes on forever with a large amount of characters. But hey, it's still an improvement over the original, because I'd rather be bored than frustrated until I just give up and cheat. The ability to cheese has been toned down in general here. Weapon ammo has been way better balanced here, so you can't just be overpowered by spamming the Elec beam. And the UI even shows how much ammo we have left, so it's not a guessing game of interpreting the energy bar. If we just focus on being Mega Man, this game is really well balanced. But the total game is much more than that, so it isn't. Though one major stumbling block of the difficulty, even as Mega Man, is the newly introduced boss rush. This wasn't part of the original Mega Man 1, as it was done in 2 separate levels, but here we have the classic boss rush that became a staple of the series, with one major exception. Defeating a boss does not drop a healing item anymore, even though that's basically expected. And this game doesn't have E-tanks either, so this boss rush is actually the hardest in the main series, and with some characters, like poor Oil Man, it is downright unforgiving. Letting us heal via either method would have gone a long way. As it stands, the only way to heal in these sections is to die, which would obviously cost you a life, so it can't be relied upon. And the boss rush level also doesn't end there, since we also have to fight a copy robot at the end, and in a touch I love, these are specifically based on which character we are playing as. In fact, during the playthroughs as Robot Masters, in their respective levels we end up fighting against a Mega Man copy, since the original is obviously incorruptible, he's just absent. The corruption of the Robot Masters is on full display here as we get pre-fight banter, and it really does reinforce that these original 6 or 8 Robot Masters weren't all bad guys. They were made by Dr. Light for good reasons before the events of the game. Usually this info is just limited to the instruction manual, along with all the other Monsteropolis lore, but here in Powered Up it's right in your face. Sure, it's cheesy and comes across like a Saturday morning cartoon, but this is classic Mega Man and that's all I want. These Robot Masters are the star of the show here, and the amount of collectibles really emphasize this. Small goodies are only accessible with certain powers, and the best examples of these are required via alternate routes, which are only accessible with the robot's unique strengths, like wall jumping as Cutman, shooting electricity blocks as Elec Man, or melting ice as Fireman. It really gives these powers the time to feel useful since they're not used in the levels traditionally. One aspect of this game that I do love, that had to be changed because of all the playable characters, is the Wily boss fight. Originally the Wily machine and its 2 forms could really only be destroyed with certain weapons, which would make this impossible for characters not built around them. So now Wily Machine 1 switches its attacks constantly into a previous Robot Master attack, and its weakness changes to match the attack's weakness. It keeps the fight feeling fresh as we have to jump over fire, ice, electricity, and so on. It also means when playing as a Robot Master, the fight keeps going from phases where it's weak to incredibly defensive and incredibly normal, which means you the player have to switch between being aggressive and being on the run. The only bit of this that goes a bit too far is Dr. Wily's Oil Man attack, which in a cruel twist is his most devastating move. It's just salt in the wound now. And after the first phase is done, we have a small cutscene where Wily panics and he tries to fix what he still has left. And then the second phase happens, and it now feels like kind of an accidental last minute thing he made on the spot to avoid losing. And it comes complete with broken elements still visible, and the hammer that he used to fix it is used as a weapon as well briefly. It gives so much more personality and charm to what was otherwise the out of nowhere for real boss fight. And once Wily's defeated, we just leave him and run back home to redo everything as another character in another timeline. And once we painstakingly beat the game as every single character, the game actually begins. The high score system from the original game has been repurposed as a level-based high score that also includes our best times. So you can now work on perfecting all the runs that matter to you and skip the stuff that doesn't. You're not forced to play any level once it's already been beaten as a character. If you want to only do Wily 2 but not Wily 1, you can. If you want to play every level except Time Man's and Guts Man's stage because you hate messing up, you can. And whenever you start a level, you always come in with 2 lives minimum, so you never have the issue of beating a previous level on your last life, and then starting a new one where you feel anxious because only 1 death is allowed. Once everything is unlocked, this becomes a fun sandbox to pick and choose what Mega Man 1 content you want. And it's so quick and easy to switch characters and difficulties that you can modulate your runs all the time, but it comes after the painstaking process of doing everything first. So maybe just download a 100% save file off the internet to avoid the bad bits. And you may as well do that as well if you want the free downloadable content, as the server is being shut down. I'm sorry for reminding them by downloading Roll and all her skins a couple months ago, just must have alerted them or something. In addition to her, we also have Proto Man downloadable, for those people who don't want to play the sometimes way too tough challenges to unlock them officially. These live up to their name, they're tough challenges that would be fun to keep attempting if the failure screen didn't take too long to finish. And since they love giving you just 1 health point, a single mistake lands you in hell, as you need to wait for the game to finally allow you to retry. It's a shame it's not as executed as well as it could have been. All the ideas they made were novel, and they put each character's moves to their limits, and new mechanics and enemies not seen in the main game are here as well. The reason all this care was put into such a small challenge mode is because it's all based on this game's surprisingly in-depth level creator. It's awkward to learn, but the people who know how to use it have made some really great levels. Capcom even made some just to be brutal, or to promote things such as the upcoming Beautiful Joe game coming out on PSP in 2006. This whole level creator allowed players to upload and download levels easily with WLAN right onto their memory stick Duo. And this was surprisingly still kind of active even without Capcom's warning. It is amazing that a PSP game from 2006 still had a community in 2022 using the official servers. In fact, I had a whole paragraph of a script all about how I hope it never shuts down, but that was taken away from me. Some users made really fun levels that would be out of place in Mega Man proper, so it's good to see them be here, while the other 80% of players made recreations of other video game levels. My favourite of these were based on stages from other Mega Man games, all the way up to Mega Man 11, which feels weird since there's over a decade between the releases of Powered Up and 11. The stages can even limit exactly what moves or even playable characters are here, so it can be perfectly crafted to fit exactly what the designer wanted. The level creator even has a lot of downloadable aesthetic themes for stages, including Ghosts and Goblins style, Halloween style, Japanese style, and my personal favourite are recreations of the 8-bit Mega Man 1 aesthetics, but with a 2.5D look to them. I really wish these could be toggled on and off in the main game, because some of them really are nice. As much as I don't like it, Cutman does feel weird without the green bricks everywhere, and the weird ball aesthetic of Bomb Man is too iconic to ignore. And in a step they really didn't need to do, they created 8-bit styles for the newly introduced Time and Oil Man. The frankly way too many to ever play amount of levels here aren't all good, and how could they be? But the amount of care the developers put into the mode's visuals, audio, and mechanics, not seen elsewhere, has to be commended. It makes me want to play this garbage just because I'm so entranced by the package here. Hopefully this can all be archived somewhere, because there are a lot of gems here, even if like any other level creator most of it is unplayable or unfun. It's a sad note to end on since such a large component will be lost to time. But even without the extra levels from both fans and Capcom themselves, this is such a robust robot busting time. They weren't kidding when they called this Powered Up. It almost makes the original game seem like a relic. Though I did qualify that with the word almost, since the original was still such a pioneer for its time, and it does still hold up now, so it'll never be truly replaced. But I can at least say this is one of the most fully featured remakes I've ever seen, and it deserves a kudos just for that. If people actually bought this, we would have lived in the good timeline, where Mega Man 2 had a balanced metal blade, or Mega Man 3 had a top spin that was actually good. But as I stated at the beginning, if only one entry could be fixed, I'm glad it was this. Though it does commit a sin so large, it almost makes me not want to recommend this. The characters call him Mega instead of Rock, so this goes in the garbage pile next to the also great but still technically incorrect Mega Man 11.